Head to the starting line, space racers! We've got a new episode of Rick and Morty to break down. You're watching WhitneyVision, and these are all the Easter eggs and details you might have missed in Cryo Mort or Rickver. This is your spoiler warning! If you haven't seen Season 8, Episode 5 yet, hit pause on this video and come back later after that old kid's party. This week's episode title, Cryo Mort or Rickver, is a reference to the phrase Crimea River. Obviously, anyone under the age of 60 probably knows it best from Justin Timberlake's 2001 pop banger Crimea River. But just in case you're walking through a dark alley one night and a serial killer is like, "I'll only let you go if you can tell me where the phrase Crimea River originated." It was coined by composer Arthur Hamilton in 1953. He later said, "I had never heard the phrase. I just like the combination of words. Instead of eat your heart out or I'll get even with you, it sounded like a good, smart retort to somebody who had hurt your feelings or broken your heart." Actress and singer Julie London popularized the song in 1955 on her debut album, and it was later covered by Ella Fitzgerald. This episode really has nothing to do with a bad breakup, so it's pretty clear that the writers needed a title that they could work the word cryo into. The episode opens with Rick and Morty listening to true crime podcasts as they fly through space. Their convo is a commentary on the ethics of true crime entertainment and how many podcasts and documentaries barely hide the fact that they're just trying to make money off the gruesome tragedies of strangers. Although there isn't a particularly gory podcast that Bloodbath is specifically based on, I do know a random fun fact. Dan Harmon listens to the True Crime Garage podcast. I know this because both of us donated to Nick and the Captain's Beer Fund and we got shoutouts on the show. So, if you're really bored, you can go through all of TCG's back catalog and listen for Dan's name and my name. Rick's ship receives intel about a nearby cryo ship that still has its power on, aka the passengers aboard are still in stasis, making them a perfect target to rob. Rick calls the folks in cryo sleeping beauties, a reference to the fairy tale about a girl who can't wake up from a coma unless a hot guy smooches her. It turns out that this isn't a run-of-the-mill Ark ship. It's full of rich people, and more importantly, their expensive supply of hypercoal, ripe for the stealing. Ark ships are a trope that get its name from the biblical story of Noah's Ark, when God instructed Noah to bring 2 of every kind of animal onto a gigantic boat to survive and repopulate the planet after the big flood. These ships are a popular trope in movies, TV shows, and literature, like Passengers, WALL-E, Star Trek, Doctor Who, and The Restaurant at the End of the Universe, just to name a few. The plosive people cryogenically frozen on this ship are also fleeing their destroyed world to start over. In this instance, though, it's less like Noah's Ark, more like a bunch of rich fuckers destroyed the planet they were living on, and only the wealthiest were able to board the ship, enter stasis, and survive until they reached the next planet. The ship is lined with gold, and even the rich people's cryo tubes are gold-plated. Each of the plosifs have pointy Spock-shaped ears, and the rich folks wear Star Trek-esque uniforms in different solid colors. Rick wakes up in the children's section of the wealthy cryo chambers alongside other tweens and kids. A sign in the background reads, "There's no crying in cryo," likely displayed to discourage these rich brats from whining. 2 plosifs, Karen and Doug Jameson, approach Rick's pod, believing him to be their rapidly aged son, Jimmy Jameson, who was 11 years old when they entered stasis. Surprisingly, Rick feels protective of his fake parents. He sees them as defenseless golden retrievers, spoiled by generational wealth, but ultimately kind people. His view of them is fascinating, because Rick is usually a lot more judgmental, especially when he thinks someone is dumb, naive, or willfully ignorant. He thinks all of those things about Jerry twice before breakfast each day. So why does Rick give these random billionaires a pass, but not his son-in-law, grandson, or any of the other countless fools he refuses to suffer? I think the answer might lie in what we don't know, Rick's parents and upbringing. For a series that focuses pretty heavily on family and the way that family shapes the kind of person you become, we've heard little about Rick's own childhood. The concrete facts we have are few, and they don't offer a ton of room for theorizing. But that doesn't mean I'm not gonna try. Here's everything we know about Mr. and Mrs. Sanchez. In an after-show interview, the writers confirm that Rick is of Hispanic descent. We also see a portrait of Rick's family in Season 5's Rickternal Friendshine of the Spotless Mort in a memory of Rick's childhood home. Rick's dad has a mustache and his mom has a gigantic blonde bouffant. Based on what Rick's bedroom looks like, I'd assume that his family is comfortably middle class. They're able to hire a babysitter, and it's possible that one or both of them work during the day, which is why Rick is home alone. But that's really all we learn from seeing that family photo and Rick's childhood bedroom. Rick's dad's first and only verbal mention happened in Season 2's autoerotic assimilation, when Rick tells Unity that he wants her to set up a weird sex thing for him. He asks her to fill her largest stadium field with naked redheads and to fill the stands with any man who remotely resembles his father. As he flies towards them on a hang glider wearing an Uncle Sam suit, the dudes representing Mr. Sanchez start cheering, "Go, son, go!" Now, it's clear by the variety of men that Unity uses to represent Rick's father that the defining trait of Sanchez Sr. is that he often wore a tie, t-shirt, and slacks. This to me hints that Rick's father was incredibly work-oriented, but also that he wasn't a big CEO type and probably more of a middle manager or office drone. Listen man, I'm just a stoner who likes to find meaning in cartoons. I am really not here to delve deep into the psychosexual reasons Rick wants to bone someone in front of his dad, but I will try to explain my theories in the least gross and weird way possible. Based on these scenes, Rick very clearly has a desire and need for his father's approval. At this point in the series, going on a bender with Unity was one of the first times we saw Rick have real feelings for someone outside the main cast. He was still pre-therapy, pre-familial reconciliation, and loudly grieving his wife's death through his reckless actions. When he hooks back up with Unity, it's the first time in a long time that Rick has felt seen and comforted by another person. Or persons. I think the underlying message here is that Rick wanted to spend his time with Unity using her hive mind capabilities to receive as much love as possible during their bender. He is the type of guy who uses vices like sex, drugs, alcohol, and high-risk adventures to numb the pain and guilt he feels constantly. Lubba-lubba-dub-dub doesn't just apply to partying and meaningless bone downs. When Rick gets hooked on a feeling, he doesn't respond like a normal person. He hates Rick Prime, so he devotes his life to hunting him down. He feels so guilty about not knowing which of his daughters is a clone that he actually starts trying to be a better father. And with Unity, I believe he got addicted to the validation their brief hookup gave him. He asked her to call in a squad of dads because he wanted to maximize the feeling of being loved and accepted. And perhaps that's because his dad wasn't there for him in the way he needed him to be as a kid. Maybe he asked Unity to bring his dad in on their vice-addled spree because he wanted to show Mr. Sanchez that he's worthy of that kind of affection. Also, considering how intelligent Rick is, I'm wondering how much of his gifts went unappreciated by his father, pushing him towards a lifetime of overachieving all the time to earn the validation of a critical parent that could never be satisfied. I also don't think the football stadium and Uncle Sam outfits are coincidental either. These feel like hints that Rick's father valued traditional American ideals, perhaps showing that he would have preferred a son who was ordinary and interested in sports or business instead of one who was exceptional at science. Of course, that's purely speculation because we legitimately don't know anything concrete about Rick's papa. But like I said, Rick's response to the Jamesons really makes me wonder if he was starved for parental attention as a kid. As soon as he pretends to wake up out of that pod, Rick is instantly enamored with Karen and Doug. At the beginning of the episode, Rick bragged about being able to steal from these guys as easily as taking candy from a baby. But now that he's met those babies, he realizes that they're the parents he always wanted. Although he definitely still plans to go through the motions of a Constellatio Celebratio just to gain access to the Hypercoal Vault, he also genuinely wants to give Mr. and Mrs. Jameson a version of their son that they can be proud of. The real Jimmy Jameson is kind of a dickhead, but Rick on his best behavior is apparently the son these two always wanted. And in my opinion, his care and thoughtfulness towards them in return might signify that they're the supportive, doting parents he always wanted too. The scene where Morty starts wailing on Rick is seen in the opening credits of the series. When Tibbs and Spoogler see him beating the shit out of an old rich kid in a sailor outfit, they decide to say fuck the man once and for all and start plotting to overthrow the takeys at Rick/Jimmy's Constellatio. They rip out their compliance chips, dub Morty General Chichaco, and coin the phrase fresh planet, fresh start to encapsulate Morty's mindset that they can all start over once they reach the new world. While Rick is taking silly photo booth pics with his fake parents, Makeys all over the Constellatio are prepared for the fight. When all of the servers start revealing their bang-bangs and weapons to Morty during the party, it kinda reminded me of the scenes in Fight Club when Edward Norton first starts realizing that he's At every restaurant and bar he goes to, the service staff give him winks and knowing nods to show that they're members of Project Mayhem. The first take he killed is wearing a red uniform, a reference to the pilot episode of Star Trek, Where No Man Has Gone Before, when Lieutenant Lee Kelso is the first red shirt to die in the series. A red shirt is often used as a term for any expendable character in Star Trek, a trope they established at the literal inception of the series. After catching the real Jimmy Jameson and Guffy Chichaco stealing the money and hypercoal on surveillance, Morty pulls up an article on Now That's What I Call News to show the plosives that the kid and the janitor bought a space yacht. Now That's What I Call News is a parody of Now That's What I Call Music, a series of compilation CDs that I collected in the 90s and 2000s. I'm so old that I still have my first Now CD in the back of my closet, and there's 90 of them as of 2024. Jimmy's red suit and blonde hair kind of remind me of Gary Goodwin's look from season 1 of Final Space. With billions of dollars in gold, riches, and hypercoal on planet Blackjack 9, everyone on board the Plosif ship races off to claim the money. A move inspired by It's a Mad, Mad, Mad World, Wacky Races, and Rat Race. These comedic movies and animated series all follow different groups of strangers as they race for money or notoriety. If you check out the lower middle of the casino floor, you'll spot gambler Morty from the Rick, the Mort, and the Ugly. As usual, Morty can't resist his inner altruism and tries to speak up to enact positive change in the Plosif people's social and economic hierarchy. But also, as usual, the whole thing blows up in his face and goes terribly wrong. Over the last 8 seasons, this has proven to be a pattern for Morty. Time and again, he's tried his hardest to do the right thing, only to watch his pure intentions result in mass casualty and destruction. Take Season 2's Morty Night Run, for example. Morty tries to rescue a gaseous being named Fart from assassin Crumbopulous Michael and return it to its home planet. But his well-meaning plan backfires spectacularly. Michael dies, there are tons of civilian casualties, and Fart reveals his plan to destroy all carbon-based life forms. Then there was the time that he tried to free his girlfriend Planetina by killing her Tina Tears, only to learn the hard way that her squad was the only barrier keeping her in check from violently and lawlessly protecting the environment. And just last season, Morty turned Family Spaghetti Night into an entire planet's suicide factory. If you give a mouse a cookie, he's gonna ask for a glass of milk. And if you give Morty a bolognese, he's gonna show up at a dead spaghetti guy's funeral, cause a scene, and inadvertently start a capitalist suicide manufacturing industry in multiple worlds. I could go on, but I think you get the idea. Morty is the idealist moral compass of a show that only ever results in nihilism. No matter how hard he tries to do the right thing, it never works out the way he wants it to. And he often makes the situation 10 billion times worse than if he had just been a shitty person about it. Even the opening of this episode spells that out for viewers in the podcast bit. Rick comments that even if some podcasters or documentarians try their best to make ethical true crime shows, there's always going to be a show with less scruples willing to dive into the depravity for entertainment. And that's one of the many lessons Rick teaches all of us in this series. Life's a bitch and then you die, so fuck the world, let's go get high. Doing the right thing barely makes a blip in a vast uncaring universe, so you might as well do whatever you want. And this is what makes Morty such a necessary and simultaneously frustrating character. You want to root for Morty every single time. He's right. It's one thing to steal candy from a baby and another to blow up the stroller. Unlike Rick, the majority of Morty's values are rooted in optimism and idealism. Despite the fact that he's seen innumerable horrors across the multiverse, he still believes in boundaries, equality, and the sanctity of life. I'm not saying that Rick doesn't have his limits, he does, and the way he protects Karen and Doug in this episode proves that. But Morty is constantly trying new, often questionable things to make the galaxy a more chill place. He truly believes that if he speaks passionately to them, the people of Plosif might just put aside their differences and start over on even footing. Even though he didn't intend to lead the Makey Revolution, his innate core values still shone through to these people, and he radicalized them by helping them see their individual and collective worth. But it is frustrating to watch him fail time and again. Not because Morty's character motivations are annoying, but because it's kind of a bummer that this show rewards good behavior so infrequently. And I get it, in real life you don't always get a gold star for being a good person. Evil is rewarded all the time, and it's not fair, but I'm told that life isn't either. The writers are just being honest and staying true to Rick's character motivations. But man, do you ever feel like TV shows get too real? I'm watching underdogs in my real life fail left and right, bro. It's hard to watch Morty experience the same thing, especially because you don't want him to stop trying. You want him to retain his youthful naivete as long as possible before he becomes jaded like Rick. But at the same time, you kind of just want to shake him and be like, dude, every time you try to fix something, you just make it worse. You gotta stop ending lives with your unrelenting altruism, homie. I want Morty to succeed, but in most cases, he has to lose in order to hammer home that realism. It's not that I dislike these stories, but I do wish that more of Morty's well-meaning misadventures evolved further than one nihilistic note. But back to the space race. The song that plays during the race is Pennies by composer Ryan Elder. He's the guy who writes a lot of the music for Rick and Morty, including the theme song, but he also wrote the banger theme for Wizards of Waverly Place, and a couple different Netflix animated properties. If it's stuck in your head, it's available to listen to on Rick and Morty's Spotify playlist. I really love all the little personalized details in our featured characters' spaceship cars. The Takey Doctor has an ambulance-esque space cruiser with little prescription bottle trinkets hanging from his rearview mirror. There's a gurney in the back portion and a medical chart pinned above the driver's seat headrest. Tibbs' ship has a scooper truck attachment, and the Pastormobile is roughly the size of a smart car. Glizzop, the news anchor's vehicle, looks like a news van, and the fisherman who crashes into him is driving a space fishing boat. The zoologist is flying in a red Jeep Wrangler-looking ship with bananas in the back seat, searching for his new Lizzie, and a cop car ship joins the chase too. This guy's ship looks like a toaster mixed with an old VW van. We also see the Makey who insisted he was supposed to be flying the ship actually piloting the plosive cryo ship, although he's doing a pretty terrible job. Karen and Doug Jameson drive a brown parental-looking car. Even Rick has a new red car ship from his fake new uncle that looks like a cross between a red Ferrari and a DeLorean. He and Morty drive it straight through the Easy Access Eggs chicken coop, copying the trope of action heroes running into inconvenient obstacles during a high-speed chase. But the real contenders are Jimmy and Chachaco in their luxury space yacht. As they flee Blackjack 9, Jimmy says, "Punch it, Chachaco, load up the hypercoal," a reference to Han Solo's lines to Chewie in Star Wars. Another Star Wars ref in this episode is this three-eyed pink Yoda at the casino below the news broadcast about the space race. Despite releasing all of the money, jewels, and hypercoal into space, the remaining space racers still chose to kill each other over it. But in the end, Morty does get to enact his plan, with a Rick twist to make sure it actually works. With compliance chips in everyone's neck regardless of status, the plosifs will actually be forced to start over in the next world as equals. As usual, however, it took a lot of bloodshed to get around to Morty's idea. But who knows? Maybe this compliance chip equal footing collaboration between these two is the start of a new era. Rick has slowly been taking Morty more seriously over the last few seasons, like when he literally and metaphorically realizes that he needs Morty's help to push the escape pod lever at the end of Season 5's Rick Murray Jack, or when he acknowledges his grandson's strength and badassery after making it through the Denny's fear hole. As I've mentioned a few times in my other vids about this season, Rick is trying harder to foster relationships with his family members in the aftermath of Rick Prime's defeat. I think we'll see more episodes like this in the future, where both Rick and Morty find a compromise that comes from each of their ideas. Those are all the details that I could find in Cryo Mort or Rickver, but I want to know if there's anything I missed in the comments. Like and subscribe to WhitneyVision, hit that notification bell, and be sure to check out my podcast with Tommy Bechtold and MT, Guardians of the Galaxy. I'm Scarlet Wit, and you're watching WhitneyVision.